April 14, 1943. The morning sky above Tunisia blazed with contrails as Allied and Axis fighters danced their deadly ballet at 25,000 feet. Lieutenant Robert Chen of the 82nd Fighter Group pushed his Lockheed P-38 Lightning through a climbing turn, the twin Allison engines singing their distinctive harmony. Behind him, a Messerschmitt Bf 109 closed rapidly, its pilot seeking the kill that would add another Allied fighter to the growing tally of Luftwaffe victories in North Africa. If you're enjoying this deep dive into the story, hit the subscribe button and let us know in the comments from where in the world you are watching from today. Chen's Lightning, serial number 42-10157, bore the squadron markings of the 1st Fighter Group and carried the nickname Desert Lightning, painted in faded yellow letters along its olive-drab nose. The aircraft represented nearly 2 years of American engineering refinement, incorporating lessons learned from early combat reports and the harsh realities of fighting German pilots who had honed their skills across 3 years of warfare. What happened next would fundamentally alter how some of the Luftwaffe's most experienced test pilots understood American engineering capabilities and challenge their assumptions about air combat tactics that had dominated European skies since 1939. Chen's P-38, damaged by cannon fire from the pursuing Messerschmitt, executed a forced landing in territory controlled by German forces. The pilot survived and would spend the remainder of the war as a prisoner. His aircraft, however, was about to embark on a journey that would profoundly shake the confidence of German fighter pilots who had built their reputations on the belief that European air combat doctrine represented the pinnacle of tactical innovation. If you're enjoying this deep dive into the story, hit the subscribe button and let us know in the comments from where in the world you are watching from today. The Lightning lay relatively intact in that Tunisian field, soon to be recovered by German salvage teams who had developed systematic procedures for retrieving and evaluating crashed Allied aircraft across North Africa and the Mediterranean theatre. Within days, this particular machine would be transported to Rechlin, the Luftwaffe's primary testing facility, where German engineers and test pilots would discover capabilities that fundamentally challenged everything they thought they understood about American fighter design philosophy. German intelligence had been tracking the P-38 Lightning since its first appearance in European skies during 1942. Initial reports from Luftwaffe pilots described an unusual twin-engine fighter with distinctive twin booms and a central nacelle that looked more like a medium bomber than a pursuit aircraft. Many German pilots initially dismissed the Lightning as another example of American industrial crude engineering that prioritized quantity over tactical effectiveness. The prevailing wisdom among Luftwaffe tactical circles held that single-engine fighters represented the optimal configuration for air superiority missions. Twin-engine aircraft were inherently heavier, less maneuverable, and more vulnerable to battle damage. The Germans had experimented with twin-engine fighters like the Messerschmitt Bf 110, but combat experience had proven these machines inferior to single-engine types in the fighter versus fighter combat that characterized air battles over Europe. American designers, it seemed, had ignored these obvious lessons and built a fighter around 2 engines, creating an aircraft that violated fundamental principles of pursuit aviation. German pilots expected the P-38 to handle like a bomber, fight like a bomber, and die like a bomber when confronted by properly flown single-engine fighters operated by experienced pilots. These comfortable assumptions began dissolving the moment German salvage teams reached Chen's crashed Lightning and began their systematic examination. The aircraft was substantially larger than any single-engine fighter, but its construction revealed sophisticated engineering that challenged German preconceptions about American technical capabilities. The twin-boom configuration initially struck German engineers as inefficient and unnecessarily complex. Why build one aircraft with 2 engines when you could build 2 aircraft with 1 engine each? The redundancy seemed wasteful, the kind of approach that nations with unlimited resources might pursue without considering tactical effectiveness or production efficiency. The recovery operation proceeded according to established German procedures for valuable captured equipment. Specialized transport vehicles carefully loaded the major components, and the Lightning began its journey to Rechlin, where German aviation's most experienced test pilots and engineers would subject it to exhaustive analysis. The facility represented the nerve center of Luftwaffe technical intelligence, a place where captured Allied aircraft underwent systematic evaluation to discover exploitable weaknesses and identify technical innovations worth copying. By spring of 1943, Rechlin had become home to an extraordinary collection of Allied aircraft, representing every major type in service with American and British forces. Spitfires sat alongside Thunderbolts, B-17 bombers neighbored Soviet fighters, creating a surreal museum of enemy air power that provided German engineers with unparalleled opportunities to study Allied design approaches. The P-38's arrival generated immediate curiosity among Rechlin's technical staff. Unlike most captured aircraft that arrived as twisted wreckage requiring extensive reconstruction, Chen's Lightning needed only moderate repairs to restore airworthiness. The engines had sustained damage but remained fundamentally sound. The airframe showed combat damage but no major structural failures. German mechanics estimated they could have the aircraft flying within several weeks. The systematic evaluation process at Rechlin followed established protocols designed to extract maximum intelligence value from captured equipment. German engineers would first conduct detailed ground examinations, measuring every component, analyzing construction techniques, and documenting systems integration approaches. Test pilots would then evaluate flight characteristics through carefully planned test flights that progressively explored the aircraft's performance envelope. The goal extended beyond simple curiosity. German tactical doctrine required accurate intelligence about enemy capabilities to develop effective countertactics. If the P-38 possessed unexpected strengths, Luftwaffe pilots needed to understand those advantages to avoid tactical situations that favored the American aircraft. Conversely, if the Lightning showed exploitable weaknesses, that intelligence would be immediately distributed to operational fighter units across all fronts. The Lockheed P-38 Lightning emerged from a design philosophy that fundamentally differed from European fighter development. American engineers approached the problem of long-range, high-altitude interception, with an emphasis on providing pilots with overwhelming firepower, concentrated in a stable gun platform that could destroy targets with short, decisive bursts. The aircraft's twin-engine configuration reflected this philosophy. Rather than accepting the inherent limitations of single-engine fighters, Lockheed designers built an aircraft around two Allison V-1710 inline engines, each producing approximately 1,200 horsepower. This massive power installation gave the P-38 a total of 2,400 horsepower, nearly double the power available to any single-engine fighter in operational service. The twin booms that characterized the Lightning's distinctive silhouette housed the engines, landing gear, and coolant radiators while providing mounting points for the main wing and tail surfaces. This configuration left the central nacelle entirely available for the pilot, armament, and avionics, without requiring compromise between competing systems for limited space. The wing design incorporated lessons learned from high-speed research that emphasized laminar flow airfoils and clean aerodynamics. The Lightning's wing featured relatively thick airfoil sections that provided structural strength and internal volume for fuel tanks, while maintaining aerodynamic efficiency across a broad speed range. Fowler flaps along the trailing edge enhanced low-speed handling during landing approaches without compromising high-speed performance. Most revolutionary was the aircraft's armament installation. While European fighters scattered their guns across the wings, requiring pilots to account for ballistic convergence at specific ranges, the P-38 concentrated all firepower in the nose of the central nacelle, 450 caliber Browning machine guns and one 20mm Hispano cannon fired along the aircraft's centerline, eliminating convergence problems entirely. This configuration meant that P-38 pilots could engage targets effectively at any range, from point-blank distance to maximum effective range, without adjusting their aim to compensate for gun placement. The psychological advantage was enormous. European fighter pilots had to estimate range carefully and position themselves at optimal convergence distances to achieve maximum hit probability. Lightning pilots could fire whenever they had a clear shot. The nose armament installation required sophisticated engineering to manage the substantial recoil forces generated by 5 large-caliber weapons firing simultaneously. Lockheed engineers reinforced the central nacelle structure and designed a gun bay that distributed recoil loads throughout the airframe, rather than concentrating stress at mounting points. The 20mm cannon occupied the centerline position, with the 4 machine guns arranged symmetrically around it. This installation provided devastating firepower density. A 3-second burst from all weapons would put nearly 200 rounds into the target area, far exceeding the firepower of any single-engine fighter. More importantly, those rounds would all impact in the same general area rather than being scattered across the target by convergence geometry. German engineers examining the captured Lightning understood the theoretical advantages of nose-mounted armament, but they struggled to comprehend how American designers had overcome the practical challenges. Mounting heavy weapons in an aircraft's nose shifted the center of gravity forward, potentially creating handling problems and requiring ballast in the tail to maintain proper balance. The recoil forces should have created structural stress and stability problems. The Allison engines that powered the P-38 represented sophisticated inline designs with turbo superchargers that provided excellent high-altitude performance. Unlike German inline engines that relied on mechanical superchargers driven directly from the crankshaft, the Allison installation used exhaust-driven turbo superchargers mounted in the wing roots. This system captured waste energy from hot exhaust gases and used it to compress incoming air, maintaining engine power at altitudes where mechanical superchargers became inefficient. The complexity was substantial, requiring extensive ducting, intercoolers, and control systems, but the performance advantages were equally substantial. At 30,000 feet, where German fighters struggled with thin air and reduced power, the P-38's engines continued producing nearly full power. The Lightning's fuel capacity astounded German engineers familiar with the severely limited range of their own fighters. The aircraft carried over 400 gallons of internal fuel distributed across multiple tanks in the central nacelle and wing sections. With external drop tanks, total fuel capacity exceeded 600 gallons, providing operational range that seemed almost incredible to German pilots accustomed to 90-minute missions. This enormous range fundamentally transformed escort operations in ways that proved strategically decisive. Early in the war, German fighters could simply wait until shorter-range Allied escorts reached their fuel limits and turned back toward their bases, then attack unprotected bombers during the most dangerous portions of their missions. The P-38's range eliminated this tactical window completely. German test pilots approached their first flights in the captured Lightning with professional skepticism mixed with genuine curiosity. Official information had consistently portrayed American aircraft as examples of mass production efficiency rather than sophisticated engineering, emphasizing quantity over quality and industrial capacity over technical innovation. The prevailing view among many German aviators held that American designers built adequate aircraft in vast numbers, but lacked the engineering sophistication and attention to detail that characterized the best German designs. These assumptions would face systematic challenge once experienced German test pilots climbed into the Lightning's distinctive twin-boom cockpit. The cockpit layout immediately impressed German pilots familiar with the cramped confines of single-engine fighters. The P-38's central nacelle provided spacious accommodations with excellent visibility in all directions. The pilot sat high in the aircraft with unobstructed views forward, upward, and to both sides. Rearward visibility, while limited by the twin booms, exceeded what most German fighters provided. The instrument panel revealed sophisticated systems integration that reflected careful attention to pilot workload and operational tension. Requirements. Engine instruments for both power plants were logically grouped and clearly marked. The complex turbo supercharger controls included automatic regulators that reduced pilot workload during altitude changes. Fuel management systems allowed precise control over tank selection and fuel transfer between different tank groups. The comfort level surprised German pilots accustomed to Spartan fighter cockpits designed around minimum weight and maximum performance. The P-38 seat provided excellent support during long missions, The cockpit was effectively heated and ventilated. There was even a relief tube for extended flights, acknowledging that Lightning pilots might spend 6 or 8 hours airborne during long-range escort missions. The control harmony impressed test pilots from their first taxi attempts. Despite its size and weight, the Lightning handled predictably on the ground with effective brakes and responsive steering. The nosewheel configuration, unusual among fighters of that era, provided excellent directional control during ground operations and eliminated the ground handling problems that plagued tail-wheel aircraft. The takeoff experience challenged every assumption German pilots held about twin-engine fighters. The massive power available from 2 Allison engines accelerated the P-38 smoothly and rapidly despite its substantial weight. The aircraft lifted off at reasonable speeds and climbed away with authority that matched or exceeded many single-engine types. Engine synchronization proved remarkably simple, thanks to sophisticated propeller governors that automatically maintained proper RPM settings. German twin-engine aircraft required constant attention to keep both engines synchronized, creating pilot workload that detracted from tactical awareness. The P-38 systems managed synchronization automatically, allowing the pilot to focus on flying and fighting rather than managing engine settings. Once airborne, the Lightning's handling characteristics systematically demolished German preconceptions about twin-engine fighters. The controls were well harmonized with elevator, aileron, and rudder forces properly balanced across the entire speed range. Control response was crisp and predictable without the heavy, sluggish feel that characterized most twin-engine aircraft. The P-38 could be maneuvered aggressively without displaying dangerous characteristics or unpredictable behavior. Roll rate exceeded that of many single-engine fighters. The aircraft would enter and recover from steep turns cleanly without tendency toward stalls or spins. German test pilots found they could fly the Lightning as aggressively as they flew their own single-engine fighters. High-altitude performance proved even more impressive than ground-based analysis had suggested. The turbo-supercharged Allison engines maintained power output at altitudes where German fighters experienced significant performance degradation. At 30,000 feet, the P-38 retained excellent climb performance, high-speed capability, and responsive handling while German interceptors struggled with reduced power and degraded maneuverability. This high-altitude advantage carried profound tactical implications. American bomber formations typically operated at altitudes between 25,000 and 30,000 feet, where defensive firepower remained effective against fighters forced to slow down for attack. German fighters equipped with mechanical superchargers lost substantial power at these altitudes, reducing their speed advantage and making interception more difficult. The Lightning could escort bombers at these altitudes while maintaining full combat capability. The aircraft could fight effectively at altitudes where German interceptors labored with reduced performance, providing American bombers with protection throughout the most dangerous portions of their missions. Speed trials conducted under controlled conditions confirmed the P-38's clear superiority in this critical performance category. The Lightning could achieve approximately 400 miles per hour at optimal altitude, significantly faster than contemporary German fighters when measured under comparable conditions. This speed advantage proved tactically decisive because it allowed P-38 pilots to dictate engagement terms according to their preference. American pilots could choose when to engage German fighters and when to avoid unfavorable situations. They could pursue fleeing opponents who lacked sufficient speed to escape. Equally important, they could disengage from unfavorable encounters by accelerating away from German fighters that lacked the speed to force continued combat. The dive performance revealed another area where the Lightning demonstrated clear advantages over conventional fighters. The aircraft could dive at very high speeds without encountering the control stiffening and reduced effectiveness that plagued most fighters approaching their maximum design speeds. Pilots could recover from steep high-speed dives without requiring excessive physical effort or experiencing control problems. This diving capability eliminated a primary German tactical advantage. Luftwaffe doctrine emphasized diving attacks from altitude to build speed and energy before pulling back up to safety. The P-38's ability to follow German fighters through high-speed dives and maintain full control authority throughout the maneuver negated this traditional German tactical approach. Turn performance presented a more complex picture that required careful analysis by German test pilots. The P-38 could not match the sustained turn rate of lightweight single-engine fighters like the Bf-109 in level flight at moderate speeds. The Lightning's weight and wing loading created inevitable compromises in sustained turning performance that favored lighter, more compact aircraft. However, German pilots discovered through systematic testing that the P-38's clear advantages in speed, power, and energy retention allowed skilled pilots to avoid sustained turning engagements entirely. The Lightning excelled at energy management, converting speed to altitude and altitude back to speed efficiently throughout combat maneuvering. This capability enabled Lightning pilots to fight using energy tactics rather than accepting turning fights where their aircraft held disadvantages. They could engage when conditions favored attack and disengage when threatened, forcing combat on their terms rather than accepting the enemy's preferred engagement geometry. The structural strength and robust construction impressed German engineers who examined the airframe systematically. The P-38 was substantially built with significant safety margins engineered into critical components throughout the structure. This robust construction philosophy contrasted markedly with German design approaches that often pushed structural limits to absolute minimums in pursuit of weight reduction. The twin-engine configuration provided inherent redundancy that single-engine fighters could not match. Loss of one engine still left the Lightning with 1,200 horsepower and the ability to return to friendly territory. Engine failure in a single-engine fighter typically meant immediate forced landing or bailout, often over enemy territory. The fuel system incorporated sophisticated self-sealing technology and redundant fuel pumps that enhanced survivability under combat conditions. Multiple fuel tanks distributed throughout the aircraft meant that damage to any single tank would not critically compromise the aircraft's range or operational capability. Range capabilities astounded German pilots accustomed to severely limited endurance in their own fighters. The P-38 could fly operational missions exceeding 6 hours duration, covering distances that seemed almost impossible to German pilots whose combat radius barely exceeded 200 miles under optimal conditions. This massive range advantage fundamentally transformed escort operations and long-range interception missions. The Lightning could accompany bombers throughout entire missions deep into enemy territory and return to base with comfortable fuel reserves. German interceptors often had to break off attacks and return to base for fuel, while American escorts remained on station, providing continuous protection. Most significantly, German test pilots who flew the captured P-38 mock combat scenarios consistently reported being impressed by the aircraft's concentrated firepower and the psychological impact of nose-mounted guns. The ability to fire effectively at any range without convergence considerations created tactical flexibility that single-engine fighters could not match. During mock dogfights against German fighters, Lightning pilots could engage targets at longer ranges than wing-mounted guns allowed. The concentrated firepower meant that even brief firing opportunities could prove decisive. German pilots found themselves reluctant to accept head-on passes against an aircraft that could bring 5 large-caliber weapons to bear with perfect alignment. The 20mm cannon particularly impressed German aviators. While Luftwaffe fighters typically carried 20mm cannons in their wings, the P-38's nose-mounted cannon fired along the aircraft's centerline with devastating accuracy. A single, well-aimed burst could destroy critical components or inflict fatal damage on enemy aircraft. German pilots who engaged the captured Lightning in training exercises quickly discovered the difficulty of successfully attacking an aircraft whose pilot understood and properly utilized energy management techniques. When German fighters attempted to engage in traditional turning fights, the P-38 would refuse the engagement by extending away using superior speed and power. When German pilots tried to climb above the Lightning for diving attacks, the P-38's superior high-altitude performance often allowed it to outclimb pursuing fighters. When German fighters attempted to escape unfavorable situations, the Lightning's speed advantage made successful disengagement extremely difficult. The systematic evaluation process at Rechlin included detailed technical analysis conducted by German engineers who possessed considerable expertise in aircraft design and manufacturing. They examined the P-38's construction techniques, materials selection, and systems integration with the goal of identifying innovations worth incorporating into German designs. The nose armament installation received particular attention. German engineers noted the sophisticated structural modifications required to mount heavy weapons in the aircraft's nose, while maintaining proper center of gravity and structural integrity. The gun bay design distributed recoil loads effectively throughout the airframe, without creating stress concentrations that could lead to structural failure. The turbo-supercharger system fascinated German engineers who recognized its performance advantages but also understood the manufacturing complexity and maintenance requirements. The system required precision manufacturing and high-quality materials that might be difficult to replicate under wartime production conditions in Germany. The manufacturing quality impressed German technicians familiar with the challenges of wartime production. The P-38 demonstrated consistent build quality, with tight tolerances and excellent fit and finish throughout the aircraft. Components were interchangeable between aircraft, a level of manufacturing precision that German factories struggled to maintain while under constant pressure to increase production rates. If you find this story engaging, please take a moment to subscribe and enable notifications. It helps us continue producing in-depth content like this. The electrical and hydraulic systems revealed sophisticated redundancy that enhanced operational reliability under combat conditions. Multiple generators provided electrical power with automatic load distribution. The hydraulic system included backup pumps and accumulator systems that maintained functionality even after battle damage. German engineers recognized that these redundant systems added weight and complexity, but provided operational advantages that could prove decisive in combat. An aircraft that remained controllable and functional after sustaining battle damage gave its pilot better chances of survival and successful return to base. The cockpit ergonomics reflected careful attention to pilot effectiveness during extended missions. Controls were logically positioned within easy reach. Instruments were clearly marked and sensibly grouped by function. The overall design reduced pilot workload and allowed concentration on tactical situations rather than aircraft management. The evaluation flights at Rechlin continued over several weeks, with different test pilots exploring various aspects of the Lightning's performance envelope. The consensus emerged that this aircraft represented a sophisticated and effective fighting machine that challenged fundamental assumptions about optimal fighter design. The captured P-38 demonstrated that twin-engine fighters could match or exceed single-engine aircraft performance in most critical areas, while providing additional capabilities impossible with single-engine configurations. The nose-mounted armament created firepower density and accuracy advantages that wing-mounted guns could not match. The high-altitude performance enabled by turbo-supercharged engines provided tactical advantages at the altitudes where bomber escort missions occurred. The exceptional range transformed strategic bombing operations by eliminating the vulnerable periods when bombers flew without escort protection. Perhaps most significantly, the systematic evaluation revealed that American engineering capabilities equaled or exceeded German achievements in critical areas of aircraft design. The P-38 represented sophisticated technology successfully implemented in operational aircraft, rather than the crude mass production that German propaganda had suggested characterized American aviation. The technical intelligence gathered from the captured Lightning supported conclusions that existing German fighter designs required substantial improvements to remain competitive with advanced Allied aircraft. The Luftwaffe faced opponents whose aircraft possessed significant performance advantages in several critical areas. The psychological impact on German pilots who flew the P-38 extensively cannot be understated. These experienced aviators had entered the war confident in their superior training, aircraft capabilities, and tactical doctrine. The Lightning evaluation forced acknowledgement that Allied aircraft possessed decisive advantages that German skill and courage could not easily overcome. The nose-mounted armament particularly affected German pilot psychology. European fighter pilots had learned to exploit convergence limitations of wing-mounted guns, by maneuvering to ranges where enemy firepower became less effective. The P-38 centerline guns eliminated this tactical option, creating psychological pressure that affected decision-making in combat situations. German pilots who had flown the captured Lightning understood that engaging P-38 seconds meant confronting an opponent whose firepower remained effective at any range. The concentrated guns could destroy an aircraft with shorter bursts than wing-mounted weapons required. This knowledge inevitably influenced German pilot behavior, encouraging earlier disengagement and more cautious tactics. The evaluation program at Rechlin represented a sophisticated attempt to counter Allied advantages through systematic intelligence gathering and tactical innovation. German test pilots provided detailed reports about P-38 capabilities, limitations, and recommended counter tactics that were distributed to operational fighter units across all fronts. However, knowledge alone could not overcome the fundamental performance advantages that the Lightning possessed. Understanding intellectually that the P-38 could outrun, outclimb, and outgun German fighters provided limited practical benefit when German pilots still had to engage these superior aircraft in defense of German territory. The captured Lightning evaluation coincided with Germany's deteriorating strategic situation across multiple fronts. The Luftwaffe suffered from chronic fuel shortages that severely limited training time for new pilots. Experienced pilots who might have effectively countered aircraft like the P-38 were increasingly rare, lost to relentless attrition during brutal air combat. Aircraft production, while remaining surprisingly high despite Allied strategic bombing, could not replace losses quickly enough to maintain force strength. Most critically, the industrial capacity required to implement design improvements suggested by the P-38 evaluation simply did not exist within Germany's war-stressed economy. The recommendations emerging from Rechlin included adopting nose-mounted armament, developing improved supercharger systems, increasing aircraft range, and emphasizing redundancy in critical systems. Implementing these improvements would have required redesigning aircraft from scratch, retooling factories, and diverting resources from immediate production needs. Germany lacked the time, materials, and industrial capacity to follow the American example. The evaluation provided valuable intelligence that confirmed what many already suspected. Allied aircraft possessed significant technological advantages that German industry could not quickly match given wartime constraints and resource limitations. The broader implications of German pilots directly experiencing superior American engineering extended beyond immediate tactical considerations. The P-38 represented tangible evidence that American industrial and technical capabilities had achieved parity with or superiority over German achievements in critical areas of military technology. This uncomfortable realization challenged fundamental assumptions about relative national capabilities that had been carefully cultivated through years of propaganda, emphasizing German technological superiority. German pilots who flew the Lightning could not honestly dismiss American engineering as crude or unsophisticated based on direct personal experience. The strategic air campaign over Europe succeeded largely because aircraft like the P-38 Lightning provided capabilities that German fighters could not effectively counter. Long-range escort missions became operationally feasible once aircraft with the Lightning's range and performance entered service in substantial numbers. If you find this story engaging, please take a moment to subscribe and enable notifications. It helps us continue producing in-depth content like this. The concentrated firepower of nose-mounted guns proved devastatingly effective against German fighters whose pilots had learned tactics optimized for engaging aircraft with wing-mounted armament. The psychological impact of facing weapons that remained effective at any range fundamentally altered combat dynamics in favor of American pilots. Production numbers told a sobering story about relative industrial capacity. American factories were producing P-38 seconds at rates that exceeded German single-engine fighter production, while simultaneously building other fighter types, bombers, and transport aircraft. This industrial advantage translated directly into numerical superiority that compounded the P-38's technical advantages. The quality of American pilot training also became apparent through combat encounters analyzed by surviving German pilots. American aviators typically arrived at operational units with extensive flight training, advanced combat instruction, and thorough familiarity with their aircraft's capabilities and limitations. German pilot training had been severely compressed by fuel shortages and the loss of experienced instructors. New pilots often arrived at frontline units with minimal experience and inadequate preparation for the intensity of air combat against well-trained opponents flying superior aircraft. The combination of better aircraft, better training, and overwhelming numerical superiority created tactical situations that German skill and courage could not overcome. The P-38 evaluation at Rechlin provided detailed understanding of one component of this Allied advantage, but understanding alone could not reverse Germany's deteriorating position. The captured Lightning served its intelligence function until late 1943, when it was reportedly destroyed during an Allied bombing raid on Rechlin. By that time, the aircraft had provided German engineers and pilots with comprehensive understanding of American design philosophy and engineering capabilities. The knowledge gained influenced German fighter development programs during the war's final years, but these improvements arrived too late and in too small numbers to affect strategic outcomes. Advanced German designs like the Focke-Wulf Ta-152 and various jet aircraft incorporated lessons learned from captured Allied aircraft, but resource constraints prevented these improvements from reaching operational units in meaningful quantities. The legacy of the P-38 evaluation extends beyond its immediate tactical impact. The systematic analysis conducted at Rechlin demonstrated the value of professional technical intelligence gathering even under desperate strategic circumstances. German engineers and test pilots provided objective, accurate assessments of enemy capabilities that informed tactical planning and aircraft development. Their conclusions, while professionally uncomfortable, accurately reflected the reality that Germany faced opponents with significant technological and industrial advantages. This honest assessment provided military leaders with the information necessary for realistic planning, even when that information confirmed unfavorable strategic trends. The technical sophistication demonstrated by the P-38 Lightning helped establish design principles that influenced fighter development throughout the jet age and beyond. The concept of concentrated nose-mounted armament appeared in numerous post-war fighter designs, from early jets through modern air superiority aircraft. The emphasis on high-altitude performance, extended range, and robust construction became standard requirements for fighter aircraft operating in contested airspace. The P-38's twin-engine configuration, while not widely adopted for pure fighters, influenced the development of multi-role aircraft that combined fighter and attack capabilities. Modern military aircraft design continues to reflect lessons first demonstrated by the Lightning's evaluation at Rechlin. Redundant systems, sophisticated avionics integration, and emphasis on pilot effectiveness characterize contemporary fighter aircraft just as they characterized the P-38 inches 1943. The nose-mounted cannon installation that so impressed German test pilots evolved into the centerline gun installations found in most modern fighters. The principle of concentrating firepower along the aircraft's longitudinal axis for maximum accuracy remains fundamental to fighter armament design. The psychological impact documented by German pilots who flew against the captured P-38 illustrates how weapon system effectiveness extends beyond pure technical performance. The knowledge that enemy aircraft possessed weapons effective at any range influenced pilot behavior and tactical decision-making in ways that multiplied the Lightning's technical advantages. Contemporary air combat continues to demonstrate these psychological factors. Pilots facing opponents with superior weapons systems must account for those advantages in their tactical planning, often resulting in more conservative approaches that limit their own effectiveness. The systematic evaluation process developed at Rechlin established procedures for technical intelligence gathering that military organizations continue to use today. The combination of detailed technical analysis, flight testing, and tactical evaluation provides comprehensive understanding of enemy capabilities that supports both immediate tactical planning and long-term development programs. The captured P-38 Lightning that crashed in Tunisia during April of 1943 ultimately served a purpose far beyond what its original pilot could have imagined. Lieutenant Robert Chen's aircraft became an instrument of revelation for German aviation, providing undeniable evidence of American engineering sophistication and industrial capability. The systematic evaluation conducted by experienced German test pilots and engineers documented capabilities that challenged fundamental assumptions about fighter design and tactical doctrine. The Lightning's nose-mounted armament, exceptional range, and sophisticated systems integration represented achievements that German industry could study and appreciate, but could not replicate under wartime constraints. The knowledge gained from flying the captured P-38 provided German pilots with realistic understanding of what they faced in combat, but that knowledge primarily confirmed the growing disparity between Allied and German capabilities. Understanding that Lightning pilots could engage effectively at any range and possessed aircraft with superior speed and altitude performance did little to improve German tactical prospects. The evaluation represented professional competence in technical analysis and honest assessment of enemy capabilities. German engineers and test pilots provided their superiors with accurate intelligence about Allied aircraft performance, even when that intelligence confirmed unfavorable strategic trends. The P-38 Lightning's combination of concentrated firepower, exceptional performance, and robust construction established design principles that continue to influence fighter aircraft development. The aircraft proved that American engineers could create sophisticated, effective military technology that matched or exceeded the best German achievements. The psychological impact on German pilots who flew the captured Lightning extended beyond immediate tactical considerations. These experienced aviators were forced to acknowledge that their opponents possessed technological advantages that skill and training could not overcome, fundamentally altering their understanding of the air war's likely outcome. The strategic implications of aircraft like the P-38 Lightning ultimately proved decisive in establishing Allied air superiority over Europe. The combination of superior technology, overwhelming production capacity, and comprehensive pilot training created advantages that German forces could not counter despite their professional competence and personal courage. The story of the captured Lightning at Rechlin illustrates how technical intelligence gathering can provide accurate understanding of enemy capabilities while simultaneously revealing the limitations of knowledge alone to overcome fundamental strategic disadvantages. German pilots learned exactly what they faced when engaging P-38 seconds, but that knowledge could not provide them with the superior aircraft they needed to fight on equal terms. The most revealing aspect of the P-38 evaluation came not from flight testing or technical analysis, but from weapons testing conducted under controlled conditions at Rechlin's firing range. German engineers had carefully studied the Lightning's nose-mounted armament installation, but understanding the configuration theoretically and experiencing its effectiveness practically proved to be entirely different experiences. The test setup required meticulous planning. German technicians positioned target aircraft at various ranges and angles to simulate realistic combat engagement scenarios. They mounted cameras to record the precise impact patterns of the P-38's concentrated firepower compared to conventional wing-mounted gun installations found on German fighters. The captured Lightning was loaded with ammunition and positioned on Rechlin's firing range for systematic gunnery evaluation. German test pilots would fire controlled bursts at stationary targets, while technicians documented the results with high-speed photography and detailed impact analysis. The psychological preparation proved as important as the technical setup. German pilots had spent years developing marksmanship techniques optimized for wing-mounted cannons and machine guns. They understood convergence distances, had memorized ballistic trajectories, and could instinctively compensate for the geometric challenges of hitting targets with weapons mounted outside the aircraft's centerline. The P-38's nose-mounted guns eliminated all these familiar complications. When Hans-Joachim Marseille, one of Germany's most accomplished fighter pilots temporarily assigned to Rechlin for evaluation duties, squeezed the trigger during the first controlled firing test, every round fired along exactly the same trajectory as his line of sight through the gun sight. There was no convergence distance to estimate, no geometric compensation required, no need to adjust aim based on range estimation. The 20mm cannon and 450 caliber machine guns all fired precisely where the pilot aimed, regardless of target distance. For pilots accustomed to the complex ballistics of wing-mounted weapons, this represented a revolutionary simplification of air-to-air gunnery. The target aircraft, positioned 600 yards downrange, absorbed the full impact of a 3-second burst from all 5 weapons. Every round, struck within a circle approximately 6 feet in diameter, concentrated devastation that would have completely destroyed any operational aircraft. The same burst fired from wing-mounted guns would have scattered impacts across a much larger area, with many rounds missing entirely due to convergence geometry. Marseille, despite his exceptional marksmanship skills developed through hundreds of combat missions, found the experience almost unsettling. The ease of accurate shooting with nose-mounted guns eliminated much of the skill and judgment that had made him one of Germany's leading aces. Any competent pilot could achieve devastating accuracy with weapons that fired exactly where the gun sight pointed. The implications extended far beyond individual marksmanship. Fighter pilot training devoted enormous time and effort to developing gunnery skills that overcame the inherent limitations of wing-mounted weapons. Pilots learned to estimate range precisely, to lead moving targets correctly while accounting for convergence, and to position themselves at optimal distances for maximum hit probability. The P-38's armament configuration rendered much of this training irrelevant. American pilots could achieve lethal accuracy with significantly less training time and experience than required for effective gunnery with European fighter configurations. This training efficiency multiplied American advantages in pilot production and preparation. The 20mm cannon particularly impressed German observers. European fighters typically carried 20mm weapons in their wings, creating installation challenges and convergence complications that reduced effectiveness. The P-38's centerline cannon fired with devastating accuracy and impact concentration that wing-mounted cannons could not match. During extended firing tests, German pilots discovered that the nose-mounted installation provided superior performance across the entire engagement envelope. At close range, where wing-mounted guns often fail to converge properly, the centerline weapons remained perfectly aligned. At long range, where wing guns spread their impacts too widely for effective damage, the P-38's weapons maintained lethal concentration. The target practice sessions revealed tactical implications that extended beyond pure marksmanship. German fighter tactics had evolved around the limitations of wing-mounted armament, emphasizing specific attack angles and engagement ranges that maximized hit probability while minimizing exposure to enemy fire. P-38 pilots faced no such constraints. They could engage effectively from any angle at any range within their weapon's ballistic envelope. This tactical flexibility provided enormous advantages during the fluid, chaotic maneuvering that characterized air combat. Head-on attacks, traditionally risky for fighters with wing-mounted guns because of poor convergence at close range, became devastatingly effective for Lightning pilots. German pilots who had learned to exploit convergence limitations found those tactics useless against aircraft whose weapons remained effective regardless of geometry. The firing demonstrations continued over several days, with different pilots testing various engagement scenarios. The consensus emerged that the P-38's armament represented a fundamental advancement in fighter firepower that conventional fighters could not match through tactical innovation alone. The concentrated firepower density meant that brief firing opportunities could prove decisive. German pilots often required sustained firing passes to achieve kills with their scattered wing-mounted weapons. Lightning pilots could destroy targets with short, accurate bursts that reduced exposure time and ammunition consumption. The psychological impact on German pilots who witnessed these demonstrations cannot be overstated. These experienced aviators had built their reputations on exceptional marksmanship skills developed through intensive training and combat experience. The P-38's nose-mounted guns seemed to make such expertise less relevant, allowing average pilots to achieve accuracy that only exceptional marksmen could match with conventional armament. Major Hermann Graf, despite his impressive combat record with over 200 confirmed victories, found the experience profoundly unsettling. The ease of accurate shooting with centerline guns challenged fundamental assumptions about air combat that had shaped his entire flying career. Graf had spent years mastering the complex gunnery techniques required for effective shooting with wing-mounted cannon. He understood convergence distances intuitively, could estimate target range precisely under combat stress, and had developed an almost supernatural ability to hit maneuvering targets despite the geometric challenges of scattered gun placement. The P-38 made all this hard-won expertise less valuable. Any pilot with basic marksmanship training could achieve lethal accuracy with weapons that fired precisely where the gun sight pointed. The democratization of accurate gunnery represented a strategic advantage that multiplied American pilot effectiveness across the entire force structure. German test pilots systematically evaluated the P-38's gunnery performance against different target types and engagement scenarios. They tested effectiveness against fighter-sized targets, bomber formations, and ground targets to understand the full scope of the Lightning's armament advantages. Against fighter targets, the concentrated firepower proved devastatingly effective. Single bursts that might only damage aircraft struck by scattered wing-mounted weapons could completely destroy fighters hit by the P-38's concentrated fire. The lethality per round fired increased dramatically when all weapons struck the same general area. Against bomber formations, the nose-mounted cannon provided exceptional penetration and destructive capability. The 20mm rounds could punch through bomber structure and detonate inside critical systems with precision that wing-mounted weapons could not achieve. German pilots recognized that P-38 seconds represented serious threats to bomber formations, despite being escort fighters rather than dedicated interceptors. The technical analysis of the armament installation revealed sophisticated engineering that addressed the practical challenges of mounting heavy weapons in the aircraft's nose. Recoil forces that should have created structural problems and handling difficulties were effectively managed through careful design and robust construction. The gun bay structure distributed recoil loads throughout the central nacelle, rather than concentrating stress at mounting points. The weapons were precisely aligned and mounted with sufficient rigidity to maintain accuracy, despite the substantial forces generated during firing. The ammunition feed systems provided reliable operation under high-G maneuvering without jamming or misfeeds. German engineers noted that achieving this level of integration required manufacturing precision and quality control that exceeded typical wartime production standards. The Americans had clearly prioritized armament effectiveness over manufacturing simplicity, accepting greater complexity and cost to achieve superior combat capability. The comparative analysis between P-38 armament and German fighter weapons revealed uncomfortable truths about design philosophy and manufacturing capability. While German fighters carried impressive firepower on paper, the practical effectiveness was significantly reduced by convergence limitations and installation compromises. The Bf-109G carried one 30mm cannon and two 13mm machine guns, formidable armament that could destroy any aircraft with well-placed hits. However, the weapons were mounted in different locations with different ballistic characteristics, creating convergence. Challenges that reduced hit probability and required exceptional pilot skill for effective employment. The Focke-Wulf 190A carried four 20mm cannons and two machine guns, overwhelming firepower that exceeded the P-38's weapon count. But the wing-mounted installation scattered impacts across a wide area, except at specific convergence distances, reducing the probability of achieving concentrated damage necessary for quick kills. The P-38's 5 weapons, while fewer in number, delivered their combined firepower to the same impact point, regardless of range or engagement geometry. This concentration multiplied effectiveness beyond what pure weapon count suggested and provided tactical advantages that could not be overcome through superior marksmanship alone. The evaluation expanded to include mock combat scenarios, where German pilots flying captured Allied aircraft engaged each other to understand tactical implications under dynamic conditions. These exercises provided insights that static gunnery tests could not reveal about the P-38's combat effectiveness. During simulated dogfights, pilots flying the Lightning consistently achieved higher hit rates and more decisive results than those flying conventional fighters. The nose-mounted guns allowed accurate shooting during high-G maneuvering, when wing-mounted weapons became extremely difficult to aim effectively. The stable gun platform created by the P-38's size and weight provided additional advantages during deflection shooting at maneuvering targets. The aircraft's mass resisted sudden movements that could throw off aim, while the centerline weapons remained aligned regardless of the aircraft's attitude or G-loading. German pilots attempting to engage the P-38's mock combat quickly discovered the psychological pressure created by facing weapons that could fire accurately at any range. Traditional fighter tactics relied on exploiting convergence limitations to reduce enemy effectiveness at certain distances. These tactics proved useless against an aircraft whose weapons remained lethal throughout the engagement envelope. The head-on pass, a maneuver that German pilots often used to exploit convergence problems in Allied fighters, became extremely dangerous when facing a P-38. The Lightning's centerline guns could deliver concentrated firepower during the brief moment when both aircraft flew directly at each other, creating hit probabilities that made such attacks prohibitively risky. Diving attacks, another standard German tactic, proved less effective against P-38 seconds, whose pilots could maintain accurate return fire throughout the engagement. The nose-mounted guns could track attacking aircraft more easily than wing-mounted weapons, providing defensive capabilities that conventional fighters could not match. The mock combat exercises revealed that P-38 pilots could dictate engagement terms not only through superior performance, but also through armament advantages that made many standard fighter tactics inadvisable. German pilots found themselves forced into increasingly constrained tactical approaches that reduced their own effectiveness. The systematic evaluation included detailed analysis of ammunition consumption and combat efficiency. The P-38's concentrated firepower required fewer rounds to achieve decisive results, extending operational endurance and reducing logistical burdens compared to fighters that needed sustained firing to accumulate sufficient hits. German pilots typically expended their entire ammunition load during a single combat mission, often without achieving confirmed kills due to the difficulty of concentrating damage with scattered weapon installations. The P-38's nose-mounted guns could achieve the same destructive effect with significantly less ammunition expenditure. This efficiency translated into extended combat capability and reduced vulnerability during ammunition replenishment. Lightning pilots could engage multiple targets during a single mission while retaining sufficient ammunition for self-defense, a capability that conventional fighters could rarely match. The psychological warfare implications became apparent during the evaluation process. German pilots who had flown against the captured P-38 reported heightened stress levels and more conservative tactical decision-making when facing the prospect of engaging aircraft with centerline armament. The knowledge that enemy weapons remained effective at any range eliminated tactical options that German pilots had relied upon for survival. The psychological pressure of facing concentrated firepower that could destroy their aircraft with brief, accurate bursts affected pilot performance and decision-making in subtle but significant ways. The evaluation team documented these psychological factors as carefully as they recorded technical performance data. Military effectiveness extended beyond pure engineering specifications to include the human factors that determined combat outcomes, and the P-38's armament created psychological advantages that multiplied its technical superiority. The final gunnery evaluation sessions included comparative testing between experienced German aces and average skilled pilots firing the P-38's weapons. The results confirmed that nose-mounted armament reduced the skill differential between expert and ordinary pilots by simplifying the gunnery problem. Exceptional marksmen like Marseille and Graf could achieve devastating accuracy with any fighter armament configuration through superior training and natural ability. However, the gap between their performance and that of average pilots narrowed significantly when using centerline weapons that eliminated convergence challenges. This democratization of accurate gunnery represented a strategic advantage for air forces with limited training time and instructor availability. American pilots could achieve effective combat capability with less extensive gunnery training than required for proficiency with European fighter configurations. The technical documentation compiled during the P-38 evaluation included detailed recommendations for German fighter development based on lessons learned from the Lightning's armament installation. The report emphasized the overwhelming advantages of nose-mounted weapons and recommended immediate development of fighters incorporating centerline armament. However, the practical challenges of implementing these recommendations proved almost insurmountable, given Germany's wartime constraints. Redesigning fighters around nose-mounted guns required extensive engineering development, tooling modifications, and manufacturing changes that would disrupt production for months. The Me-262 jet fighter program incorporated some lessons learned from the P-38 evaluation, including nose-mounted cannons that provided concentrated firepower. But resource limitations and production difficulties prevented these advanced designs from reaching operational service in meaningful numbers. The Rechlin evaluation established that the P-38 Lightning's nose-mounted armament represented a fundamental advancement in fighter effectiveness that conventional wing-mounted installations could not match. The concentrated firepower eliminated convergence limitations, simplified gunnery techniques, and provided tactical advantages that multiplied pilot effectiveness. German test pilots who flew the captured Lightning and experienced its armament capabilities firsthand could not dismiss American engineering achievements as crude or unsophisticated. The nose-mounted gun installation demonstrated technical innovation and manufacturing capability that exceeded German accomplishments in this critical area of fighter design. The evaluation provided detailed intelligence about enemy capabilities that influenced German tactical planning and development priorities. However, the knowledge gained primarily confirmed the growing technological gap between Allied and German aircraft, rather than providing solutions that could close that gap under wartime conditions. The systematic analysis conducted at Rechlin represented professional competence in technical intelligence gathering, despite Germany's deteriorating strategic position. German engineers and test pilots provided accurate, objective assessments of enemy capabilities that informed military decision-making even when those assessments confirmed unfavorable trends. The P-38's armament evaluation demonstrated that American aircraft designers had solved fundamental problems in fighter effectiveness through innovative engineering approaches that German designers had not pursued. The nose-mounted gun installation created capabilities that conventional fighters could not match regardless of pilot skill or tactical innovation. The knowledge that Lightning pilots possessed weapons effective at any range fundamentally altered German pilot psychology and tactical approaches. The evaluation provided understanding of what German fighters faced in combat, but that understanding primarily emphasized the magnitude of American technological advantages rather than revealing exploitable weaknesses. The systematic documentation of P-38 capabilities represented one component of Germany's broader effort to understand and counter Allied technological superiority through intelligence gathering and analysis. The evaluation demonstrated both the value of professional technical assessment and the limitations of knowledge alone to overcome fundamental strategic disadvantages. The immediate tactical implications of the Rechlin findings rippled through Luftwaffe operational planning like shockwaves through water. Fighter commanders across the Western and Mediterranean fronts received detailed intelligence briefings based on the P-38 evaluation, forcing fundamental reassessment of engagement tactics that had served German pilots effectively for years. The traditional approach of exploiting convergence limitations in Allied fighters became not merely ineffective, but actively dangerous when applied against P-38 seconds. German pilots who attempted to maneuver into the convergence gaps that rendered most fighters less effective found themselves facing weapons that maintained lethal accuracy regardless of range or geometry. Luftwaffe tactical doctrine required immediate revision to address the reality that Lightning pilots possessed firepower advantages that conventional counter-tactics could not neutralize. The nose-mounted armament eliminated tactical options that German pilots had relied upon for survival, forcing adoption of increasingly constrained engagement methods that reduced German effectiveness. The psychological impact extended far beyond individual pilot confidence to affect unit cohesion and operational planning. Squadrons equipped with intelligence about P-38 capabilities reported decreased willingness to press attacks against Lightning formations, earlier disengagement from unfavorable encounters, and generally more conservative tactical approaches that reduced overall mission effectiveness. Squadron leaders struggled to maintain aggressive tactical postures when their pilots understood intellectually that they faced opponents with fundamental firepower advantages. The knowledge that enemy weapons could destroy German fighters with brief, accurate bursts created hesitation and caution that multiplied the P-38's technical superiority through psychological pressure. The evaluation results influenced German aircraft development priorities during the war's final years, though resource constraints severely limited the ability to implement lessons learned from captured Allied aircraft. Design teams working on advanced fighter projects incorporated nose-mounted armament where technically feasible, recognizing the overwhelming advantages demonstrated by the Lightning's centerline guns. The Messerschmitt Me-262 jet fighter program benefited from P-38 evaluation data, incorporating 4 30mm cannons mounted in the aircraft's nose for concentrated firepower that eliminated convergence problems. However, production difficulties and resource limitations prevented the Me-262 from reaching operational service in numbers sufficient to influence strategic outcomes. Other advanced German designs, including the Focke-Wulf Tu-152 high-altitude fighter and various experimental aircraft, showed increasing attention to armament concentration and installation quality, based partly on intelligence gathered from captured P-38 seconds. But these improvements arrived too late to affect the war's outcome. The broader implications of German pilots experiencing superior American engineering firsthand extended beyond immediate tactical considerations to challenge fundamental assumptions about relative national capabilities. The P-38 represented tangible evidence that American industrial and technical achievements equaled or exceeded German accomplishments in critical areas of military technology. This uncomfortable realization undermined years of propaganda, emphasizing German technological superiority and industrial leadership. German pilots who had flown the captured Lightning could not honestly dismiss American engineering as crude mass production when they had personally experienced sophisticated design, integration, and manufacturing quality that exceeded German standards. The nose-mounted armament installation particularly challenged German engineering assumptions. The technical complexity of mounting heavy weapons in the aircraft's nose, while maintaining structural integrity and handling characteristics, required sophisticated engineering approaches that German designers had not successfully implemented in operational aircraft. The manufacturing precision evident throughout the P-38's construction reflected industrial capabilities that German factories struggled to match under wartime conditions. Component interchangeability, consistent quality control, and reliable systems integration demonstrated American industrial sophistication that contradicted assumptions about relative manufacturing capabilities. The strategic air campaign over Europe accelerated dramatically once aircraft like the P-38 Lightning entered service in substantial numbers during early 1944. The combination of exceptional range, concentrated firepower, and sophisticated engineering created escort capabilities that fundamentally transformed bomber operations against German targets. German fighter units that had previously succeeded in timing their attacks to exploit escort fuel limitations found themselves facing continuous fighter protection throughout entire bomber missions. The P-38's range eliminated the vulnerable periods when bombers flew without escort, forcing German interceptors to fight through screens of capable fighters to reach their primary targets. The concentrated firepower of nose-mounted weapons proved devastatingly effective against German fighters whose pilots had developed tactics optimized for engaging aircraft with wing-mounted guns. Lightning pilots could achieve lethal hit rates during brief engagement opportunities that conventional fighters required sustained firing passes to match. Production statistics told a sobering story about relative industrial capacity that German intelligence officers understood with growing clarity. American factories were producing P-38 seconds at rates exceeding 500 aircraft per month, while simultaneously manufacturing other fighter types, bombers, and support aircraft in unprecedented quantities. This industrial advantage translated directly into numerical superiority that compounded the P-38's technical advantages. German pilots faced increasing numbers of superior aircraft, flown by well-trained pilots with adequate fuel, ammunition, and maintenance support, creating tactical situations that skill and courage alone could not overcome. The quality disparity in pilot training became increasingly apparent as the war progressed, and German training programs suffered from severe fuel shortages and instructor losses. American pilots typically arrived at operational units with extensive flight training and thorough familiarity with their aircraft's capabilities, while German replacement pilots often reached frontline squadrons with minimal preparation. This training differential multiplied the P-38's technological advantages. Well-prepared American pilots could exploit their aircraft's capabilities fully, while inadequately trained German pilots struggled to maximize their fighters' remaining strengths against superior opponents. The cumulative effect of technological disadvantage, numerical inferiority, and training disparities created operational conditions that German air defenses could not sustain. Loss rates among German fighter pilots increased dramatically during 1944 as they faced the impossible task of defending German airspace against overwhelming Allied air power. The human cost embedded in these strategic realities became painfully apparent to German commanders who understood that sending inadequately prepared pilots against superior aircraft amounted to organized suicide. Yet, military necessity demanded continued resistance despite the hopeless nature of the tactical situation. German pilot accounts from this period frequently describe the psychological burden of flying missions against formations that included P-38 seconds, knowing that engagement meant confronting opponents with decisive firepower advantages. The stress of operating under such conditions contributed to declining pilot effectiveness and accelerated attrition rates. The post-war analysis conducted by aviation historians and military analysts confirmed that aircraft like the P-38 Lightning played decisive roles in establishing Allied air superiority over Europe. The combination of technological innovation, industrial capacity, and pilot training created advantages that German forces could not counter effectively, despite their professional competence and personal courage. The nose-mounted armament concept demonstrated by the P-38 influenced fighter design philosophy throughout the jet age and into contemporary aircraft development. The principle of concentrating firepower along the aircraft's centerline for maximum accuracy became standard practice for fighter armament installation. Modern air-to-air missiles typically launch from centerline positions or wing stations positioned to minimize ballistic dispersion. Gun installations in contemporary fighters almost universally follow the centerline mounting approach pioneered by aircraft like the Lightning, recognizing the fundamental advantages of weapons that fire along the pilot's line of sight. The sophisticated systems integration evident in the P-38's design established precedents for complex aircraft development that continue to influence military aviation. The coordination of engines, armament, avionics, and flight controls in a coherent, effective package became the standard approach for advanced fighter development. The emphasis on pilot effectiveness and operational capability over pure performance optimization reflected design philosophy that prioritized combat effectiveness over theoretical specifications. This approach influenced post-war aircraft development across all categories, from fighters through transport aircraft. The range and altitude capabilities, demonstrated by the P-38's turbo-supercharged engines, established requirements for strategic fighters that could operate effectively at intercontinental distances. Post-war fighter development emphasized extended range and high-altitude performance as essential capabilities rather than desirable features. The structural robustness and redundancy built into the P-38's design influenced safety standards and survivability requirements for military aircraft. The twin-engine configuration provided inherent redundancy that single-engine aircraft could not match, establishing precedents for multi-engine fighter and attack aircraft. The psychological warfare implications documented during the P-38 evaluation continued to influence military aviation psychology and pilot training. Understanding that weapon system effectiveness extends beyond pure technical performance to include psychological factors became integral to aircraft development and tactical planning. Contemporary air combat doctrine recognizes that pilot confidence and enemy psychological pressure contribute significantly to combat effectiveness. The weapons systems designed for modern military aircraft account for these human factors, in addition to pure ballistic performance. The intelligence-gathering methods developed during the P-38 evaluation at Rechlin established procedures for technical analysis that military organizations continue to use today. The systematic combination of engineering analysis, flight testing, and tactical evaluation provides comprehensive understanding of equipment capabilities that supports both immediate planning and long-term development. Modern military intelligence organizations employ similar methodologies when analyzing foreign military equipment, recognizing that complete understanding requires technical, operational, and psychological assessment rather than simple performance measurement. The professional competence demonstrated by German engineers and test pilots during the P-38 evaluation, despite their nation's deteriorating strategic position, illustrated the value of objective technical analysis even under desperate circumstances. Their honest assessment of enemy capabilities provided military leaders with accurate intelligence for realistic planning. This professional approach to intelligence gathering transcended national loyalties and political considerations to focus on military necessity and operational effectiveness. The techniques and standards established during wartime evaluations like the P-38 analysis continue to influence military technical intelligence today. The captured Lightning, designated with German markings, served its intelligence function until early 1944, when it was reportedly destroyed during an Allied bombing raid on Rechlin. By that time, the aircraft had provided German aviation with comprehensive understanding of American design philosophy and engineering capabilities. The knowledge gained influenced German tactical planning and aircraft development, but arrived too late and in circumstances that prevented effective implementation. The evaluation provided accurate intelligence about enemy capabilities, while simultaneously demonstrating the magnitude of technological and industrial advantages that Germany could not overcome. The legacy of Lieutenant Robert Chen's P-38 Lightning extends far beyond its original service as an American fighter aircraft. The machine that crashed in Tunisia during April of 1943 became an instrument of revelation for German aviation, providing undeniable evidence of American engineering sophistication and industrial capability. The systematic evaluation, conducted by experienced German test pilots and engineers, documented capabilities that challenged fundamental assumptions about fighter design and proved that American aircraft manufacturers could create sophisticated, effective military technology that exceeded German achievements in critical areas. The nose-mounted armament that so impressed German pilots established design principles that continue to influence fighter aircraft development into the 21st century. The concentrated firepower eliminated ballistic compromises inherent in wing-mounted installations and provided accuracy advantages that could not be overcome through superior marksmanship alone. The knowledge gained from flying the captured P-38 provided German pilots with realistic understanding of Allied capabilities, but that knowledge primarily confirmed the growing disparity between German and American technological achievements, rather than revealing exploitable weaknesses that could restore tactical balance. The psychological impact on German aviators who experienced the Lightning's capabilities firsthand contributed to declining morale and increasingly defensive tactical approaches that reduced German effectiveness throughout the war's final years. Understanding enemy superiority did not provide the means to overcome that superiority. The strategic implications of aircraft like the P-38 Lightning ultimately proved decisive in establishing Allied air superiority over Europe and enabling the strategic bombing campaign that accelerated Germany's military and industrial collapse. The combination of superior technology, overwhelming production capacity, and comprehensive pilot training created advantages that determined the war's aerial outcome. The story of the captured Lightning at Rechlin illustrates how technical intelligence gathering can provide accurate understanding of enemy capabilities, while simultaneously revealing the limitations of knowledge alone to reverse unfavorable strategic trends. German pilots learned exactly what they faced when engaging P-38 seconds, but that knowledge could not provide them with equivalent aircraft or tactical solutions. The professional competence demonstrated by German engineers and test pilots during this evaluation despite their recognition of enemy superiority, established standards for technical analysis that continue to influence military intelligence and aircraft development. Their honest assessment of Allied capabilities provided valuable lessons that transcended immediate wartime applications. The P-38 Lightning's concentrated firepower, exceptional performance, and sophisticated engineering represented achievements that German industry could study and appreciate but could not replicate under wartime constraints and resource limitations. The aircraft proved that American engineers had solved fundamental problems in fighter effectiveness through innovative approaches that European designers had not pursued. The evaluation process itself demonstrated the value of systematic intelligence gathering and professional technical analysis, even under desperate strategic circumstances. The knowledge gained provided German military leaders with accurate understanding of Allied capabilities, enabling realistic planning despite unfavorable implications. The influence of the P-38's design philosophy extends through post-war fighter development into contemporary military aviation, where centerline armament, sophisticated systems integration, and emphasis on pilot effectiveness remain fundamental principles. The aircraft's legacy continues in every modern fighter that concentrates its weapons along the centerline for maximum accuracy. The human story embedded within this technical evaluation reminds us that military effectiveness ultimately depends on the knowledge, skill, and courage of individual pilots and engineers who must confront technological realities, regardless of their strategic implications. The German aviators who flew and analyzed the captured P-38 provided their nation with professional service, despite recognizing enemy superiority. The captured Lightning that began its second career in German hands ultimately served a purpose that transcended its original mission, becoming an instrument of education that revealed the true nature of American industrial and engineering capabilities to opponents who had underestimated Allied technological achievements. The systematic documentation of P-38 capabilities by German technical personnel created historical records that continue to inform our understanding of World War II aviation development and the technological factors that influenced strategic outcomes. Their professional analysis provides insights into both aircraft capabilities and the intelligence-gathering methods that supported military decision-making. The story concludes not with victory or defeat in traditional terms, but with the acknowledgement that technological innovation, industrial capacity, and systematic engineering development ultimately determined the aerial war's outcome. The P-38 Lightning represented one manifestation of American capabilities that German forces could analyze, understand, and respect, but could not match or counter under wartime conditions. The revelation experienced by German pilots who flew the captured Lightning that American fighters possessed capabilities exceeding their own aircraft in critical areas reflected broader strategic realities that individual courage and tactical skill could not overcome. Understanding enemy superiority provided valuable intelligence, but could not substitute for equivalent technological and industrial capabilities. Thank you for watching. For more detailed historical breakdowns, check out the other videos on your screen now, and don't forget to subscribe.